This is the entire story of Stranger Things so far because I'm unemployed and have a lot of time. A scientist at Hawkins' lab flees a monster by entering an elevator. This is a tactical error, as elevators are essentially metal coffins. He is promptly removed from the payroll. Nearby, four boys argue over Dungeons and Dragons while a real beast waits outside. Will Byers bikes home and is abducted by a creature with no respect for property lines. The next morning, Chief Hopper wakes up fighting a losing battle against sobriety. Joyce Byers realizes Will is missing, and the town's collective blood pressure rises. Meanwhile, Nancy Wheeler ruins her reputation with Steve Harrington, while her friend Barb radiates the energy of someone who will not survive the week. Joyce begs Hopper to search for Will, but he insists nothing exciting happens here. He is incorrect. At the lab, Dr. Brenner inspects a wall that has decided to become a slimy portal. It is an architectural nightmare. Then a child named Eleven escapes the facility in a hospital gown, looking like a runaway from a very intense medical experiment. Joyce gets a call from Will, consisting of static and screaming before the phone destroys itself. She is devastated. The phone was expensive. In the rain, the boys search for Will but find Eleven instead. They hide her in the basement, because harboring a fugitive government experiment is standard middle school behavior. While Hopper conducts a useless search, Dr. Brenner sweeps the Byers shed. Eleven looks at a photo of Will and has traumatic flashbacks. It is a bad day for everyone. Later, Lucas tries to snitch on Eleven, but she slams the door with her mind. Telekinesis is a very effective debate tactic. Nancy drags Barb to a party at Steve's. While the boys use a board game to determine Will is trapped in a dark dimension, Nancy goes upstairs to make poor decisions with Steve. The fun kind. Jonathan lurks in the bushes taking photos, acting less like a brother and more like a creep. Alone by the pool, Barb is abducted by a monster. The party is over. Cut to Eleven recalling lab experiments that violate several international treaties. Joyce refuses to accept Will as dead, redecorating her home with nervous breakdown Christmas lights to communicate with him. It looks insane, but in Hawkins, paranoia is just premature accuracy. Hopper actually investigates for once, linking the lab to MK Ultra. Jonathan destroys his creep shots of Barb, which is a nice gesture, but too late. Authorities pull a waterlogged body from the quarry. It looks like Will, effectively ending the search for anyone who trusts the government. Mike throws a tantrum because he thinks Eleven lied about Will being alive. Joyce visits the morgue and refuses to identify the body, insisting her son is currently living in the drywall. Eleven hacks the radio to broadcast Will singing, proving he is alive and has terrible coping mechanisms. The boys disguise Eleven in a blonde wig that fools absolutely no one, and she forces a bully to wet himself publicly. Nancy analyzes the blur in Jonathan's photos, realizing Barb didn't just run away, she was consumed. Hopper performs unauthorized surgery on the corpse. He cuts it open and finds cotton stuffing. Will isn't dead. He's a giant plush toy. Hopper breaks into the lab, finds a pulsating organic rift, and realizes his trailer is bugged. He reacts by destroying his own living room. The boys interrupt a funeral to ask their teacher about physics, learning about the Upside Down. Nancy and Jonathan decide to hunt the monster themselves because teenagers with baseball bats are known for their efficiency against interdimensional. Meanwhile, Joyce realizes her ex-husband is only back for a lawsuit payout and evicts him. Nancy and Jonathan go target shooting, preparing to fight a Demogorgon with a revolver. Hopper joins Team Joyce, sweeping our house for bugs. In the woods, the boys follow compasses toward the gate, but Eleven sabotages the trip to avoid the lab. Lucas notices, gets telekinetically thrown, and the group fractures. Nancy crawls into a slime-covered tree hole. She's about to win a Darwin Award. Lucas decides the best way to handle conflict is to scream and wander into the woods alone. Eleven steals frozen waffles from a supermarket. It is the most logical decision she has made yet. Hopper visits a catatonic woman who offers excellent staring but few answers. Nancy and Jonathan go shopping for bear traps while Steve's friends vandalize a cinema, leading to a fistfight. At the quarry, bullies force Mike to jump to his death. He stops in midair because Eleven returns to cancel gravity and break a bully's arm with her mind. It is very efficient. Government agents chase the children, but Eleven flips a van with her brain. Physics takes a day off. Everyone converges at the Byers house to compare notes, realizing they are all fighting the same nightmare. Steve decides to stop being a sociopath, mostly. The group builds a sensory deprivation tank in a kiddie pool so Eleven can traverse dimensions to find Will. Hopper and Joyce break into the lab and are immediately captured because their stealth rating is 0. They make a dangerous administrative deal to enter the portal. Nancy and Jonathan cut their hands to lure an interdimensional predator. Steve arrives to apologize, panics, then discovers the joy of violence with a spiked bat. They set the monster on fire, but it leaves rather than dying, which is rude. In the mucus-filled Upside Down, Hopper and Joyce retrieve Will. At school, Eleven liquefies several brains before disintegrating herself to kill the beast. Will is rescued, but months later he vomits a slug in the sink. The trauma is now internalized. 1 year later, we meet Callie, a psychic punk robbing banks. In Hawkins, the boys lose arcade scores to a girl named Mad Max, a tragedy comparable to death. Will has visions of a giant sky spider, suggesting his therapy is failing. Hopper investigates rotting pumpkins while Joyce dates Bob, a man clearly too well adjusted to survive this show. New student Billy arrives with a mullet and a bad attitude. The lab burns underground roots, but the apocalypse is clearly just reloading. Barb's parents hire a private investigator, prompting Nancy to cry in a bathroom because she knows the case file is just a picture of a Demogorgon's stomach. Mike talks to Static on his radio. Hopper has hidden Eleven in a cabin, providing a balanced diet of frozen dinners and imprisonment. It is a very sweet kidnapping. On Halloween, the boys dress as Ghostbusters. Will draws a giant shadow monster, and Hopper investigates rotting pumpkins. The vegetables are dying, a subtle hint that the portal to hell is leaking again. Nancy attends a party to drown her guilt in punch, while Steve hovers like a nervous mother hen. Will goes trick-or-treating, gets called a zombie, and immediately suffers a traumatic flashback. Mike drags him home. Alone in her cabin, Eleven tries to psychically spy on Mike, but mostly just sulks in the void. Dustin finds a slimy slug in his trash. A smart person would stomp it. Dustin adopts it. Meanwhile, Hopper confirms the local flora is committing suicide because the government lab has terrible plumbing. Dr. Owens dismisses Will's visions as trauma. He is wrong and useless. Nancy and Jonathan decide to expose the lab, while Eleven sneaks out, sees Mike with a girl, and assumes she has been replaced. Teenage jealousy is terrifying. Bob gives Will heartwarming advice to stand his ground against his fears. Will listens, stands his ground, and is immediately possessed by a smoke monster. Excellent advice, Bob. Will now demands the house stay freezing because he is a meat puppet for a shadow demon. He draws scribbles that Joyce tapes to the walls, turning her living room into a map of evil tunnels. Billy bullies Steve at basketball, proving aggressive mullets are the true enemy. Dustin finds his pet slug has grown legs and eaten his cat. This was inevitable. Nancy and Jonathan get detained by the lab, and Eleven finds her mother's files, starting a side quest. Hopper enjoys a spa day in the tunnels, which mostly involves choking on alien spores. Will uses his psychic connection to locate him, proving his trauma is at least useful for navigation. Nancy and Jonathan visit Murray, a vodka-soaked conspiracy theorist, to water down the truth for the public. Meanwhile, Eleven visits her mother's memories via the psychic void, confirming that Hawkins Labs has always been terrible. Joyce and Bob realize Will's drawings are a literal map to the tunnels, because in this town, arts and crafts are usually a cry for help. The adults rescue Hopper and burn the infectious vines. Unfortunately, Will is biologically synced to the mulch, so when the roots burned, he screams. The doctors realize the boy's a double agent for the monster, which is a lot of pressure for a middle schooler. Elsewhere, Nancy and Jonathan finally clap cheeks, largely because Murray bullied them into it. Dustin recruits Steve to fight his pet slug, now a dog-sized murder beast. They bait a junkyard trap, preparing to fight an apex predator with a baseball bat. It is an optimistic strategy. Steve is spared a violent death because the demo dogs have a prior engagement, eating the scientists at Hawkins' lab. The creatures retreat from the junkyard, springing a trap the Mind Flayer set by using Will as bait. It is a tactical masterclass by a smoke cloud. Meanwhile, Eleven goes on a side quest to Chicago to meet Callie, a psychic punk from an 80s music video. They bond over telekinesis and revenge until Eleven decides murder is actually bad, ending her criminal career just as the police arrive. Eleven catches a bus back to Hawkins, abruptly ending her punk phase. At the lab, the demo dogs are aggressively downsizing the staff. Hopper and Joyce are trapped with a sedated Will to stop him from broadcasting their location to the hive mind. Bob volunteers to reset the power. He is brave, competent, and surprisingly helpful, which usually means he's doomed. Across town, Billy is violently ordered to hunt down Max. The survivors escape to the Byers house, where Mike names the monster the Mind Flayer because they refuse to die without a D&D reference. Will acts as a spy for the Mind Flayer until he taps "close gate" in Morse code, proving his brain is not entirely occupied by smoke. A landline rings, betraying their location to the hive mind, because technology hates them. A dead dog flies through the window as Eleven enters, deciding a dramatic aesthetic is more important than knocking. The group splits. Eleven goes to close the gate, while Joyce takes Will to a cabin to heat blast the demon out of him. Billy arrives to assault Steve, but is sedated by his stepsister. Steve wakes up and responsibly drives the children into a monster-infested tunnel network. Hopper and Eleven find Dr. Owens, who is inconveniently wounded but alive. In the tunnels, the children commit arson to distract the hive mind. At the cabin, Joyce turns up the heat until the shadow monster decides Will is uninhabitable and exits via his mouth. At the lab, Eleven screams at the rift until it seals. Later, Hopper forges birth certificates so Eleven can legally exist, and the children attend a dance to simulate normalcy. In Russia, scientists build a machine to open a new gate, apparently feeling left out of the apocalypse. The Russian experiment fails, and the scientists are permanently downsized. 1 year later, Starcourt Mall has conquered the economy. Steve has fallen from royalty to scooping ice cream in a humiliating sailor suit, alongside his co-worker Robin. Mike and Eleven navigate teenage dating, which Hopper finds more stressful than interdimensional monsters. Dustin builds a massive radio tower, while a power outage suggests the Mind Flayer is reassembling itself in a steel mill, waiting for a narrative purpose. Nancy investigates reports of rats eating fertilizer and exploding. Hopper decides the best way to handle his daughter's dating life is to threaten Mike in a locked car. It is effective parenting. Dustin tries to radio his girlfriend but intercepts Russian military codes, recruiting Steve and Robin to translate. Billy crashes his car and is recruited by the Mind Flayer, upgrading him from local jerk to possessed vessel. Joyce notices her magnets falling off the bridge and correctly senses a conspiracy where others just see gravity. Nancy's investigation ends when a rat explodes into gelatinous goo. It is disgusting, but perhaps tasty. Billy is formerly possessed by the Mind Flayer, which is barely distinguishable from his normal personality. Max and Eleven solve their problems through aggressive consumerism. While Joyce stands Hopper up to look at magnets, he handles the rejection by drinking until he ceases to function. Later, the girls discover Billy is kidnapping lifeguards, and Steve spies on Russian operatives. National security is now the responsibility of an ice cream parlor. Will tries to play Dungeons & Dragons, but his friends are too interested in girls to care about wizards. He destroys his childhood fort, realizing puberty is the true monster. Eleven psychically tracks a drowning lifeguard, which ruins the summer vibe. Hopper investigates the lab and gets beaten senseless by a Russian Terminator. Meanwhile, Nancy and Jonathan discover Billy is turning locals into a collective flesh slurry. It is a very messy way to build an army. Nancy and Jonathan are fired by their possessed editor. The severance package is non-existent. Will feels the monster again, prompting a strategy meeting. Hopper decides police work involves beating the mayor until he reveals a conspiracy. It is crude, but results-oriented. At the mall, Steve and Dustin recruit a child to crawl through vents. They inevitably drop into a Soviet fortress beneath the food court. The possessed townspeople writhe in unison, suggesting the hive mind has terrible reception. Eleven throws Billy through a wall. He survives and retreats to his cult of melted people. The Mind Flayer is crowdsourcing its body mass. Beneath the mall, the Scoop Troop wanders a secret base, finding a machine designed to rip a hole in reality. Upstairs, people are buying pretzels. Downstairs, the world is ending. Hopper and Joyce kidnap a Russian scientist. He speaks no English, and they speak no Russian, turning a felony kidnapping into a very frustrating road trip. Nancy and Jonathan visit the hospital where their possessed co-workers attempt to terminate their employment via murder. The journalists win, but the corpses liquefy into a fleshy slurry and merge into a single screeching monstrosity. It is disgusting but efficient. Underground, the Soviets are drilling a hole in reality. Dustin and Erica crawl through vents like motivated rats, while Steve and Robin are tied to chairs and interrogated. Hopper screams at people in a bunker, and Billy sweats in a bedroom, fully committed to his new role as a meat puppet for the shadow dimension. Eleven invades Billy's mind, finding mostly trauma and sand. She discovers the Mind Flayer is crowdsourcing a body by melting locals into a giant angry meatball. The creature takes offense, attacking the cabin and biting Eleven, which necessitates some non-sterile grocery store surgery to remove a piece of slug from her leg. Meanwhile, Dustin and Erica rescue Steve and Robin, who are drugged into a state of giggle-fueled incompetence. Hopper drags a Russian hostage to the carnival because high-stakes espionage pairs well with corn dogs. Steve confesses his love to Robin, but she informs him she plays for the other team. It is a solid rejection, but at least the torture has stopped. At the fair, Alexei enjoys 4 minutes of capitalism before an assassin terminates his subscription to life. The group reconvenes at the mall to slice sentient gore out of Eleven's leg. Just as they finish, the Mind Flayer crashes in to complain about the return policy. The adults dress as Soviet soldiers to infiltrate the basement. The world's fate hinges on a math constant, but Dustin's girlfriend holds the code hostage until he sings the theme from The Never-Ending Story. He complies. While a monster tries to eat his friends, Dustin performs a duet. It is humiliating, but effective. Upstairs, Billy breaks free of mind control long enough to be violently disassembled by the monster. He dies, redeeming a lifetime of mediocrity. Below, Joyce turns the key, vaporizing the gate, the monster, and apparently Hopper. 3 months later, the Byers family moves, presumably to find a town with lower insurance premiums. The Byers family and a powerless Eleven flee Hawkins, presumably hoping that a change of zip code will confuse the interdimensional monsters. It won't. Joyce reads a posthumous letter from Hopper that is very touching, specifically because she believes he is dead. He is actually in a Russian prison, where the catering involves being fed to a captive Demogorgon. In California, Eleven writes Mike letters claiming her life is perfect. In reality, she is socially ostracized and hanging out with a pizza driver named Argyle, whose personality is 90% marijuana smoke. It is 1986. High school social strata has been reshuffled. Lucas has abandoned his dignity to play basketball, while Mike and Dustin cling to D&D with a metalhead named Eddie Munson, a man who performs rebellion rather than living it. Max is coping with her stepbrother's death by wearing headphones and ignoring everyone, which is the smartest strategy on the board. Cheerleader Chrissy appears perfect but is actively hallucinating rotting clocks and spiders. Meanwhile, Joyce receives a doll from Russia, suggesting international mail is more reliable than local police. Joyce breaks the doll and finds a note confirming Hopper's alive, rendering her previous grief an administrative error. A montage contrasts Lucas winning a basketball game with Erica winning a D&D campaign. Both victories are treated as equally critical to national security. Chrissy attempts to buy drugs from Eddie to stop the visions, but her brain has other plans. A new villain, Vecna, telekinetically snaps her bones and implodes her eyeballs. It is a very messy way to end a date. Max witnesses Eddie fleeing the murder scene, but Dustin refuses to believe a dungeon master could commit violence. Joyce and Murray decide to fly to Alaska to pay a ransom, because walking into a trap is a hobby for them. We confirm Hopper survived the mall explosion only to enjoy the hospitality of Soviet torture chambers. In California, Mike visits the roller rink, where the local bullies humiliate Eleven. She does not have powers, so she just takes the abuse. Back in Hawkins, Nancy investigates Chrissy's death with a student journalist named Fred, who immediately begins hallucinating. Fred's survival odds have just dropped to zero. At the roller rink, Mike and Will argue about their feelings, which is the teenage version of purgatory. Eleven grows tired of the social dynamic and smashes a roller skate into Angela's face. The crowd is horrified, but it is a highly effective solution to bullying. In Hawkins, the group finds Eddie hiding in a boathouse and explains that monsters are real. It is a lot for a drug dealer to process. Meanwhile, Fred the journalist wanders into the woods and gets folded like laundry by Vecna. He was not very good at his job. Dr. Owens is harassed by the military, while Hopper freezes in Russia. Everyone is miserable. Hopper decides the best escape plan involves paying a man to shatter his ankle with a sledgehammer. It is a bold strategy that relies heavily on pain tolerance. In Hawkins, the kids link the murders to demons while Max wanders alone in the dark, practically inviting natural selection to take its course. The basketball team decides to solve supernatural murders through aggressive vigilantism. In California, Elle is arrested but intercepted by Dr. Owens, who offers to restore her powers. Mike and Will sit in a house guarded by agents, which is exactly as boring as it sounds. Max starts hallucinating grandfather clocks, implying her life expectancy has dropped to zero. Nancy and Robin commit academic fraud to visit an asylum, finding Victor Creel blind and unhelpful. The basketball captain decides the logical response to grief is hunting children. In Russia, Yuri, the smuggler, betrays Hopper for cash, rendering the broken ankle pointless. In California, the military attacks the house. The kids are saved by a stoner in a pizza van. The vehicle smells like oregano and poor decisions, but it somehow outruns the federal government. Yuri drugs Joyce and Murray, proving that trusting a criminal is poor logic. In Hawkins, Max visits her brother's grave and is pulled into Vecna's mental hellscape. She levitates, seconds away from being snapped like a twig. Fortunately, the group learns that music disrupts the curse. They blast her favorite song, allowing her to sprint out of the hallucination and back to reality. She survives, traumatized but functional. Meanwhile, Owens puts Eleven in a sensory deprivation tank to reboot her brain. It involves shaving her head again, because branding is important. Hopper's escape fails, proving that hope is merely a prelude to a severe beating. He is thrown into a frozen cell while Joyce and Murray enjoy a kidnapping at 30,000 feet. In Hawkins, Nancy identifies a rotting mansion as Vecna's lair, so the teens naturally decide to go there immediately. Jason convinces the town that Dungeons & Dragons is a satanic instruction manual rather than a hobby for nerds. Meanwhile, Eleven is submerged in a tank to relive her trauma, and the California boys bury a federal agent in the desert. It is a productive week for the California crew drives to Utah to harass a teenage hacker. In Hawkins, the group explores the Creel house until the lights flicker, confirming the demon is home and hasn't paid the electrical bill. Jason's witch hunt pauses when Vecna reconfigures his friend Patrick's skeleton into a liquid state. Joyce and Murray crash their plane in Russia and survive, defying both gravity and logic. Back in the tank, Brenner forces Eleven to hallucinate her past, apparently deciding she wasn't miserable enough the first time. Joyce and Murray drag their kidnapper through the Russian snow. Hopper is served a lavish feast in prison, which any intelligent person recognizes is just a marinade before being fed to a monster. Inside the simulation, an orderly warns Eleven that Dr. Brenner is a liar, a fact everyone else realized years ago. In Hawkins, Dustin's compass leads the group towards another interdimensional tear. Jason screams about Satan at a town hall, while the California boys use an IP address to locate Eleven in Nevada. Steve dives into a lake at night to find a portal to hell. He succeeds immediately and is pulled into the Upside Down to be chewed on by bats. His friends, displaying zero self-preservation, jump in after him to tour the slimy alternate dimension. In the lab, Eleven recalls being bullied by other psychic children, proving that superpowered kids are still just terrible middle schoolers. On the surface, the police interrogate the remaining teens, who lie with the confidence of career criminal. Lucas, Dustin, and Erica invade Nancy's privacy and discover the Upside Down is stuck in 1983. The dimension has abandonment issues. Across the rift, the older teens recycle Will's Season 1 light-blinking trick to communicate, proving that innovation dies in a crisis. In Russia, Murray cons his way into a prison where Hopper fights a Demogorgon with a flaming spear. It is barbaric, but at least it warms the room. In the desert, a polite orderly named Henry grooms Eleven to distrust the government scientists. This is not difficult as they are jailers. Hopper survives the gladiator match and hugs Joyce. It is romantic, mostly because they aren't currently being eaten. The Hawkins teens construct a rope bridge between dimensions, while Vecna's vines begin to colonize the trailer. In the lab, Eleven decides the orderly is trustworthy and removes his inhibitor chip. He immediately thanks her by massacring the staff. He reveals he's Henry Creel, #1, and a psychopath. He offers a partnership. She declines and blasts him into the Upside Down, physically warping him into Vecna. She has effectively manufactured her own nemesis. Vecna traps Nancy, but rather than killing her, he forces her to watch a visual biography of his childhood. He releases her to act as a messenger, reducing a terrifying demon to a man who just wants his story heard. In Russia, the adults tour a facility filled with dissected monsters, which is terrible interior design. The California van crew drives east, fueled by gasoline and anxiety. In Hawkins, the group concocts a plan that involves splitting up and attacking a god. Eleven watches psychically from a tank, unable to intervene in their impending doom. Dr. Brenner refuses to let Eleven leave, subduing her with a shock collar. His extreme teaching methods are interrupted when the military arrives to liquidate the facility. The Hawkins kids steal an RV and purchase heavy weaponry. Max volunteers to use her mind as bait, a plan that relies on the structural integrity of her happy memories. In Russia, the escape helicopter is a piece of junk. Back at the lab, Brenner carries a drugged Eleven into the open, presenting a perfect target for a sniper. Eleven resolves the military pursuit by telekinetically throwing a helicopter at it. Dr. Brenner bleeds out in the sand, begging for validation. Eleven ignores him, proving that a deathbed apology does not cure a decade of psychological torture. While the adults in Russia continue to yell at a smuggler, the California teenagers turn a pizza dough freezer into a sensory tank. Argyle, a man whose blood is primarily THC, is currently the group's most competent tactician. In Hawkins, the team prepares to fight an interdimensional wizard with trash can lid. The adults finally escape the Russian plotline. In Hawkins, Max agrees to a movie date with Lucas to ensure she has a future to look forward to before offering herself as bait. In a pizza kitchen, Jonathan comforts Will about his unrequited love for the oblivious protagonist, while Elle enters the freezer to find Max. Inside the murder dimension, Eddie decides the best tactical distraction is a heavy metal guitar solo. It is undeniably cool, though practically speaking, it just tells every bat in the zip code exactly where to eat dinner. Elle wanders Max's memories until Vecna arrives to ruin the nostalgia. The attic rescue is interrupted by Jason, a high school athlete operating on pure testosterone, who holds Lucas at gunpoint because he fears cassette tapes. In Russia, Hopper and Joyce kiss, suggesting the best aphrodisiac is imminent death in a gulag. Back in the Upside Down, the older teens are immediately ensnared. Vecna restrains everyone, proving that for an all-powerful deity, he relies heavily on tentacles. Things go poorly. Eddie is swarmed by bats, and Max's limbs snap like dry kindling. Mike shouts a declaration of love at a freezer, giving Eleven the scientifically unproven power to blast Vecna backward. The Russian monsters are incinerated, but the victory is technically a loss. Eddie dies in the dirt, finally a hero to a town that hates him, and Max's temporary death rips fiery chasms through Hawkins. The survivors reunite in the rubble to deal with the inevitable property damage and trauma. Max survives, though her bones have been rearranged into a puzzle Lucas cannot solve. At the refugee high school, Robin flirts successfully, and Dustin confirms Eddie died a hero rather than a fugitive. The survivors repair the cabin until Hopper returns, proving he is merely traumatized rather than deceased. Eleven cries, satisfied with the return of her parental figure. Finally, the group watches toxic spores rain upon Hawkins. The world is ending, but at least the property values will finally drop. Moral of the story? She not a stranger to my thing.